self-discovery, lessons, and stories of individuals who achieved success in their own personal path. Trust the process.
Welcome back to the Personal Process Podcast. My name is Parham. I am the host of the Personal Process Podcast, and I wanted to thank you. This is our final episode of our official Season 1. Today's guest is Benyamin Zargar, and he is just been accepted to an Australian medical program, and we wish him the best for this. Now, we are going to go through a little bit of Benyamin's journey, but I want to dive into a very deep topic that Benyamin has intrigued me on. And that is essentially how the climate, the weather, and politics is influenced by where we live and how that affects our thoughts as a society. And without further ado, sir, I would like to bring you on stage. How's it going, Benyamin?
Good. Well, thank you, Parham John, for inviting me to this podcast. Definitely it's been, I'm honored, listening to the previous episodes. You brought so many amazing people in, and, I'm very small, part of this, and it's just an honor to be involved. So I think I can give a quick introduction about me.
Please.
As you said, I'm Benyamin. I just finished my Bachelor of Science in Health Sciences from Simon Fraser University. That's actually where I met Parham. We were in the same school. He graduated a little bit earlier than me. I also did a minor in history, and that's where my interest for the humanities comes into place, because I've always had the interest for geography, history, a little bit of politics, actually. As up to I was 19 or 20 years old, I wasn't that much interested in politics. I was mainly looking at geography and history in isolation. But after that, I got into reading more on politics and trying to broaden my understanding. But yeah, as Parham mentioned, I will be starting my medical school journey the next few months in Australia. So I'm a big fan of Commonwealth. As you can see, I'm in Canada now. I will be moving to Australia, and that will be a new journey. And from my professional experience, while being at school, I also worked with individuals with chronic diseases and obesity, and that's where I also really got to understand the impact that the social environment, the financial situation, and essentially our environment plays in not just developing the disease, but also its prognosis, and whether we can actually make some significant changes. Because again, when you look at certain diseases, it requires significant lifestyle changes that may not be possible if you do not have the financial means, if you are not living in a supportive environment, and so many other factors being involved. And connecting that to my understanding of geography and history, I got interested to get more into understanding why certain wars occurred, why certain wars are happening. Is it just because there's the good guy and there's the bad guy fighting each other, or there are underlying causes, underlying factors that we may not be looking at? So I think I'll pass the mic back to you, Parham.
Yeah.
If you want to ask some questions, and we'll get the discussion going.
Awesome. So first of all, Benjamin, I think let's go a little bit through your history, because with your experience working in, for individuals who are suffering from obesity, I'm wondering what kind of shaped that. And I know a little bit of the backstory of it, but I wanted to kind of hear it from you. And I think that may have inspired your medical journey, if I'm not mistaken. So how about we hear about that? Because I think that's a pretty interesting story to start us off.
Absolutely. Yeah. So for my, kind of passion to become a doctor, I think I've always had that, especially because, my mother is a physician, but I really wanted to get that firsthand experience to get a sense of, what medicine is really about. And, by working with these individuals with obesity, it really, was a moment for myself that I made sure that I really want to become a doctor. I really want to, make that impact in the individuals' lives. advocate for their well-being, and help them be the best of their of their life that they can achieve. And before actually I continue, I apologize for my me being grammatically challenged. English is still my second language, so I always try to be cognizant and fix myself. But if you hear some
No.
weird grammatical errors, I apologize to the individuals who speak English as the first language. I don't have
No.
that luxury.
Not at all, man. You're doing great.
Yeah.
You're doing great. But okay, so with regards to that, so that's what led into medical school, a clinical application. So I guess let's switch gears here and go into the meat of what we wanted to talk about. So me and Benjamin have been chatting a little bit about this, and we just had a nice chat about it. And I'm just like, man, this is pretty unique stuff that I don't think a lot of people think about, discuss, know. And I'm not trying to pretend like I'm a master of this information. I barely know it. I just heard a little bit from Benjamin. And I think from this, we don't want to pretend like we're experts in this field by any means. Benjamin has a very big passion in history. He's done a minor in history and he studies it. But I think what I wanted to kind of just dictate before we dive into here, we're not experts. We're just two dudes having a conversation. And we just hope some other individuals can enjoy it. So with that said, Benjamin, what is up with culture and the impact of climate? And I want you to just lead us off from there, sir.
Sure. Add to your point before we going on, just emphasizing again, as Parham mentioned, I don't consider myself an expert in the field by no means. I consider myself a very novice researcher, and the reason I would like to talk about this topic on this podcast is mainly to inspire other people to do more readings and to lead them to go
Do their own
and
journey.
do their own journey
Yeah.
and understand this more. So most of the stuff that I'm saying are simply citation of the experts in the field. I'm like, I've kind of prepared some notes for myself. I will be talking about some bigger pictures, and then going into details. But it's very important to understand even some of these details that I may just talk about it for 5 minutes. It could be someone's PhD thesis. So it's a very complex topic. And if I do any sort of simplification, any sort of modeling, is just purely to help people understand it better. But by no means I'm trying to simplify certain things and be like, hey, that's the reason behind this particular event, and that's
Right.
it. No, it's way more complex. But obviously, it's not possible to talk about it in a 1 hour podcast. Again, some people spend their entire life on these topics. Okay, so getting into the topic, get into the talk of, well, what influence our environment plays in shaping our culture, shaping our collective unconscious, and also the political mindset of certain nations. Because and the narrative a lot of us may hear is that certain events, certain wars, such as the conflict in Middle East, a prime example of it. All of us, are familiar with it through the news. Some of us lived through it. We may think that, well, it's just because some dudes decided to become radicalized, and they become the extremists in Islam. So Islam is at fault. I don't know, like going through these radical schools that are at fault, and they don't know what democracy is. We should send them the democracy, and they can all live in peace. That's the narrative that a lot of us may hear through the media, and a lot of us may believe in it to some sense, that the reason people in Sweden are happiest in the world is just because they have the culture to be happy, but people in Iraq, they don't have it. They're uncivilized. These are the very simple ways of looking at it. Or other events, Israel is killing Palestinians because they are evil, or the other narratives, Palestinians fighting Israel, so they are evil. This good and evil is not really true when we are looking at the broader history and how the environment impacts the culture. So let me think of how I'm actually going to start this, because
Well,
it's a very
it's a,
big. Yeah, go
it's
ahead.
a very deep topic, but let me just bring back a little quote. I'm just
Yeah.
paraphrasing here from a previous conversation, but you mentioned that humans are kind of like microbes on a petri dish. Certain temperature environments can be optimal, but if you go too much or too little, we can all get into a flurry. And well, for the microbe, it would die off, but it would just not be optimal for humans, and bad things can happen. So I'm wondering if you could kind of elaborate on that and give us your perspective on that, because that's a pretty cool quotation.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up, because that's something, I talked to you about it and I kind of let that slip tonight. So I'm glad you brought it up. It's because we, at the end of the day, even though we may get to a sense that we as humans are like gods, because we have made so many advancements in technology, a lot of things that we have done no other organism could ever done, again, going to space, flying, like, all these things may give us a sense that we are beyond our nature and we are the superior creature. But at the end of the day, we are just part of this puzzle. We are
Mm,
living in an environment that we are seriously dependent on. Even though we've made so many advancements, we still don't know how to create water out of scratch, out of it at a fair cost. So the water is a
limiting
problem.
factor.
Yeah, we don't know how to stop tornadoes. We don't know how to stop forest fire. Like, all those things, and that's our environment. And that's why I made that example of the petri dish, is that that's the same as bacteria. If you're growing a culture in the lab, little bit playing around with the temperature, and the bacteria dies off. At a larger scale, that's how humans would function, and that's why everyone is freaking out about the climate change. Is because once we change that climate, then we no longer can live.
Hmm. Is it the same everywhere though?
It's not going to be the same everywhere, just because the climate of every single place in the world is different, and the impact of the climate change is going to be different. And that's one of the things that researchers have warned us about, that not every country will be hit equally by the climate change. Based on the last time I read, China and US will be the nations that will get impacted the most from the climate change. Russia will probably benefit from it. Very,
Also,
very, yeah. And why Russia would benefit from it, and I think I'll start talking about that, and that will kind of get us connected to the history and the other topics I wanted to talk about.
for sure.
One reason Russia would benefit from it is because once the Arctic ices melt, Russia will be able to open new trade routes on the north and go through the Northwest Passage, because those are frozen throughout the year. And
Hmm.
Russia is actually doing it. Russia is building numerous ports up in the north of Siberia, and is mobilizing troops, mobilizing cities. So they are expecting these ice to melt to open new trade routes.
Right.
However, it's very optimistic to think that, well, if the ices melt over there, it's just going to open new trade routes, and Russia will gain a lot from it, because we have no clue what's going to happen to the southern part of Russia. Is it going to be too warm? How's the soil quality? Can they actually grow crops there? So it's not like climate change. It's will 100% benefit certain countries, but based on where they are located, Russia will probably benefit from it. But again, it's not like climate change is a good thing.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's interesting because it seems like there's a lot of factors at play here, but I guess so this isn't something that I follow too much, but it is something that from our conversations that you are intrigued about. So I guess I'd like you to educate me, Mr. Benjamin, future MD.
absolutely.
Um
For sure,
with
MD.
with regards to the whole climate change notion, Is it different in different parts of the world? Because I know, in Canada, everyone's saying climate change is very important. We should take it very seriously for great reason, right? And that's what the science has said, that climate change is a huge reality. But is that not going to be the case in areas like Russia, from your understanding, or?
I'm not very well educated on that field of how countries are preserving climate change, to be honest with you. But what I'm seeing is that certain countries may not necessarily be super concerned about it, and they are trying to benefit from the climate change. But how do Russia preserve climate change? I don't know. It's very, very difficult question. But why does climate change matter? I think that can bring us to the topic. One thing we know is that geography, for most of the cases, it's not a fluid concept. It's
What do you mean by that?
It's kind of set in a stone. No matter what you do, Rocky Mountains stay where Rocky Mountains are currently at. You can't move Rocky Mountains, right? You can't.
I can.
You can do it. Let's do it.
Just kidding.
Yeah, you can't. Move Himalayan mountains over.
Right.
Nepal will always have certain geography. India will always have certain geography. China will always have certain geography. Iran will always have certain, geography elements that we cannot change. One thing that changes though in this equation, because like if geography is sedentary, then we kind of be like, okay, if you're in a good climate, you're good. If you're in a bad climate, you're screwed. But one thing that changes is the climate. The climate is the fluid part of these equation, because geography is sedentary. You can't move the seas, you can't move lakes. They're there. They've always been there. But the climate can change the equations. Can change how we approach certain problems, how certain problems rise. That's one thing. So one is climate. The other aspect of the geography that's fluid is technology and the trade routes. So trade routes are the most important, arguably, again, it's very much my humble opinion, invention of the human history. And I do remember in my first grade or second grade history book, when we're studying the ancient history of ancient Iran, one of the most, like, they had like a list of all the things that the ancient Persian Empire did as, like, the positive things they did. The number one was that they made new roads, like they made part of the Silk Road. Trade routes are important because they allow us to have money and have people being transported from different parts of the world and having these people communicate with each other. And those trade routes are what those trade routes are what that has determined our history
and our evolution,
our culture, our wars, our political interests, whether we are prone to racism or whether we are not prone to racism. Those go back to trade routes.
Right.
Let me ask you this question, because I think the way to get this discussion going is to ask questions and see what you think, and then give some perspective. Why do you think central United states such as North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, Illinois, those that are more conservative? Have you ever thought of why would they be more conservative? Why they are more prone to racism? Why there are less tolerable to other cultures versus let's say California.
Yeah. I mean, no, I haven't thought about that before, but based on the context we're talking, I'd have to throw in an educated guess of climate.
Climate and geography and the interaction.
What do you mean the interaction between the two?
The interaction between the people.
Hmm.
So historically speaking, if you were living, let's say, in Iowa, you had less exposure to the foreign world because you're not close to any major ports. There are no major trade routes. So you have less interaction with other people who are not like you. And that will make you prone to have a sense or some sense of racism, because racism, again, is a social phenomena and is used to, allow us to protect ourselves, again, protect quote unquote, against what we consider different from us.
Right.
It's not a right thing, but it's there. We know it's there. And it's not, people are not racist because they're evil. There's so many underlying causes
Sure.
that lead to it. So in contrast with Iowa, if you look at California, the racism is less prone. Why? Because there is way more interaction. There is much more money flowing in California. Why? Because it's close to trade routes. It's close
Right.
to ports. And that goes on throughout almost every
Country.
city in the world and every
Right.
country in the world. One thing we hear when you read history, that in the Ottoman era,
Right.
Muslims, Jews, Christians lived in peace together, and everything was butterflies and rainbows. Is it because the Ottoman Empire had a superior culture and superior tolerability and superior democracy? Not necessarily that, because if that was the case, then why, after fall of Ottoman Empire, these, different people start fighting with each other?
Right.
One reason for it was because there was a lot of money flowing in Ottoman Empire, because they were in the center of the trade route before construction of Suez Canal. I'll talk about the Suez Canal as well.
Sure.
And these people interacted with each other at the level of society, and there was no need to fight.
Right.
Because why do you want to get into a fight if you are having business interaction with each other? Greeks played an important role in Ottoman era, but after the Ottoman Empire became weaker because of the construction of Suez Canal, and Greeks started thinking of, we want to become independent because they were being very poor, then they started having clashes with the Ottomans.
Right.
So is it because Ottomans are evil, Greeks are good, or anything like that? Absolutely not. These are the events that have happened that led to certain nations, certain religions fight against each other. It's not the ideologies that clash with each other.
Right. I just wanted to kind of bring it back a little bit.
Mhm.
We're talking about the fact that we're cities where there is trading routes, there's ports, they are, less racist. But I'm wondering how that can play out in a general population, because yes, a city may make, let's say, I don't know, let's say something exuberant, like 99% from trade from completely different region. But how does that play out to the normal citizen? Because they don't see the trades coming in. Sure, the money can flow in, but that average person doesn't get exposed to that. So I'm wondering how that gets about.
Well, the average person actually gets exposed to that. And we are talking about not right now, we're talking about like even going back 2000 years ago, because you
Mhm.
have these ships, you have these caravans coming into your city. They bring money, and the money will boom the economy. Everyone will benefit from the economy. But you also see these different people, like the cities that are situated on the old Silk Road, which would go from China past the Central Asia, past Iran, and in Istanbul, and then from there by through Navy go to Venice. All these cities, you see that they've got large, businesses situated just on the trade route, and you have all these different caravans coming in, all these different people you are interacting with, and you realize, hey, they're not evil, they're not the enemy. Because why do we feel racist? Because is the fear of unknown to a certain degree. We've never met these kind of people they must be the threat to us. But once you meet them, once you make business interaction, once they bring benefit to you, once they bring the money in, you're like, okay, hey, you know what? It's okay. I can be friends with them. It's no big deal. And that has happened throughout the entire history. It's not just right now. It goes again. As far as humans have lived, they always wanted to trade. They always wanted to have the money. They always wanted to, uh, um,
Right.
find the cheapest way to move goods around and make money out of it.
Makes sense. So let's bring it back again to the Suez Canal, because we had a interesting event happen with the Suez Canal. And I mean, I guess we saw the implications firsthand. So I guess what are your thoughts on the Suez Canal in the greater picture?
Exactly. Okay. So going back, talking about Suez Canal, going back about geography, we can't change it. That's basically what was happening until 1769, 1869, where Suez Canal was constructed. Why is that? Because this was the trade route before the construction of the Suez Canal. So if you wanted to trade with China and India, these were the two major countries that the rest of the world would trade with, because they are the source of all the goods that Europeans dreamed of. China had silk, India had jewelries, and and all those things. So they were the centers. They were the centers of the trade, and they're still the centers of the trade. So it's not like China is the new country that builds goods. They've always been the major industry. So in order to do trade with China and India, you had two options. You either had to go through the ground route, that's where the Silk Road is. So you could go from China, as I said, Central Asia, Iran, Turkey, and then from Turkey you go to Venice by sea, and then Venice would be the distributor to the rest of the Europe. That's one option. Second option is that you had to cross the entire continent of Africa, past the Cape of Good Hope. And if you are listening to this, if you have a map in front of you, it makes it much easier to understand what's happening. And then make it to China and India. So the sea route, it would have been way more expensive, much more difficult, and not optimal to the ground routes. And by the way, that is why they discovered, that's not a right word, they explored and went to Americas, because the Europeans were looking for shortcuts to make it to China and India, because they did not want to take the the African route. And they were kind of upset that Venice and Ottoman and Iran and all these middlemans are having the power, because up until this 1500s and 1600s, other than Venice and parts of Italy, the rest of the Europe were not at a good shape compared to Ottoman, compared to Iran. And again, it's not because the Ottomans were smarter, Iranians were smarter. No, because they were in the trade route. That's where the money was. France didn't have that much money. UK didn't have much money because they didn't play a part into the trade game. Venice did. If you look, Venice had one of the strongest naval forces ever and the strongest empire out there. But as we lead into the 1600s, with the UK started to trying to rule over the seas and get over that sea power, they eventually become the strongest sea power we've ever seen in history. And right now they may be, but they're probably losing to US. But for many years they were the strongest. And in that process of finding shortcuts to China and India, they discover is not a right word, because it was discovered before by the indigenous people,
right?
South America and North America, and that changed the game. That's where the technology comes into place, because we didn't know these places exist. Simple as that. They built the ship, they go and they find these places, And now they can make a lot of money. Why? Because they have slaves, which is free labor, as terrible as it sounds, but one of the major reasons that Europe boomed, they got into the Enlightenment, was because of slavery. As terrible as it sounds, is because it was the free labor and free resources. So they got into, and it wasn't just the UK. It was it was the colonizers, basically Spain, Portugal, France, UK. They got into these places that no one discovered. Ottoman people had no idea about it. Iranians had no idea about it. Chinese people had no idea about it. India had no idea about it. Venetians didn't have any idea about it. UK, France, Spain, Portugal, they go and discover Brazil, for example, US, free resources plus free labor. And then you have obviously the Christian ideology coming to place to justify using these people as free laborers.
And what is that ideology?
The idea is that because they're not Christians, they're not civilized, they're savages, so we should use them, and again, or we can like, or make them Christians, and it's totally normal. We are serving them. The narratives that you're looking into, at the slavery, none of these people, wrote anywhere or talked about that. Yeah, we should do slavery because we love hurting people. They didn't really think that was the case. They thought this is genuinely the best thing that they are doing to these people.
Right. And it's an interesting point, because what is true reality? What is the objective truth in history? There's the saying that whoever writes a history book owns history, right? Because the way that you just framed it, it sounds beautiful, it sounds great, they're helping people. But, I think in this year and the previous year, a lot of people have actually been able to understand the true history of what has taken place. And it's an interesting and unfortunate thing for a lot of people that had to go through that. But yeah, man, that's just a tangent I just wanted to talk about.
Yeah, and that's, studying history, studying these topics, it's very difficult because you realize what humans are capable of in terms of atrocities. At the same time, you realize what's worse potentially is the power to justify the atrocities. I know we are going off tangent.
That's okay.
It's a very difficult topic, and that ability to justify the atrocities. If we take that into take into mind when we are looking at any historical event, it would be easier to understand it, but it's also easier to realize how prone we are to become victims of that narrative and play a part in a crime that we are justifying.
What do you mean by that? Can you give an example?
So if you, let's say you have this narrative that Nazis were evil and they killed a lot of people because they were evil, you may kind of think that, well, I'm not evil, so I can never be like Nazis. But if you go back and be like, why did they do this? You cannot have an entire nation being evil. That's just not possible. What was the ideology that was, brainwashing these people that justified it?
Right.
To make evil actions. They were not evil. They were people that did evil things. Then when you have that narrative in your mind, in future events, if you're at a place that you're making decisions for other countries, let's say you're a soldier, or you want to go to the army to help spread democracy all around the world? Is it really the good thing that you're doing, or is the narrative that the government is throwing into your head to justify atrocities?
Yeah. And I just want to bring a tangent to our tangent. There's a story when America was against Germany in the war where, long story short, what ended up happening is, I believe, I may be mixing the two sides up, but let's say, I'm pretty sure it was the German soldier. Essentially, they got cornered and, they were held at gunpoint. And what the German soldier did was offer food to the American soldier. And it was interesting because when I heard this, the rest of the story goes that the American soldier let him flee. And again, I'm not sure if it was the American soldier holding gunpoint or German soldier holding gunpoint, but it's interesting because, reciprocity is such a huge psychological factor for humans. And I think that one instance was able to overcome all the propaganda that, we are liberating people or we are helping and all this. And it seems that with the current state of affairs, people are so against one another that reciprocity is kind of thrown out the window, whether it's for political ideologies, whether it's for countries, whether it's for nations. All of that's good.
Yeah, and that's the other thing I want to talk about. I've finished up on the Suez Canal before talking about is I want to touch on how ideologies are made and adjusted to serve certain geopolitical needs. So keep that in mind.
So we're going to build our own ideology? Is this a free workshop? 3 easy steps to build your own ideology?
We're not gonna bring you're all in a part of a narrative, you're part of an ideology, and religion is one of the biggest one that plays an ideology.
Right.
that functions as an ideology. Whether you believe in a metaphysical nature of it or not, it serves as a institution, as a vehicle to serve certain geopolitical needs. And I'll get to that. Okay, so let's get into the Suez Canal because again, it's one of the most important events in the world. So you have now all these colonizers finding free resources, free labor, North America, South America, Africa, and they start building resources and gaining money, gaining power, while Ottoman, Iran, and all the other middlemans in the Central Asia, they had no idea what was going on. They absolutely had no idea these places exist.
Right.
They fall behind in the game. And this carries on until to a point that these colonizers become so powerful, UK becomes so powerful that it goes on and colonizes India, which has been the dream of every single European nation to take over India.
Because of the resources.
The resources. I was reading the other day the net worth for the East India Company, and it equaled today's net worth of Apple without considering the inflation. Like some places, I don't know how true those figures are, but the amount of money that was in India, the amount of resources that was in India and still is in India, is just phenomenal. It's phenomenal. And it's every crazy. Single of these European countries, Russia, had a dream of conquering India because China was the same thing, but all these countries knew that they could never conquer China.
Why is that?
Look, copy me. Have a map in front of you.
Yeah, so let's open up our map.
Yeah, so China from the north and the west is essentially protected by the mountains, the Himalayan mountains, which makes it inaccessible. You cannot cross those mountains, bottom line, because you need ground forces. In order to conquer a place, you need the ground forces. You need to go through the land. And if you can't go through the land, you cannot conquer a place. Prime example, World War II, Germany couldn't conquer Russia because they got stuck in the Siberian winters. Napoleon had the same thing. He got stuck. So China, you can't conquer it from the north because you also have the deserts. You have the Mongolian desert. You have to cross all of that. You can't. From the seaway, again, it's a very long route. At this point, we don't have the Suez Canal. So you have to make a very long journey to make it into China. And East China Sea and the Sea of Japan is famous for its, not suitable climate. So you have a lot
Right.
of, typhoons going on there. So it has a natural protection. And China as a country, because for centuries they have been in the same place. It's a very fertile land. You have the population booming. That's why China is still the most populated country on earth. They've always had a large population because their land is very fertile, and they don't have too much. Their population is very homogeneous.
And do you mind just describing homogeneous a little bit further?
So the amount of genetic diversity that you see in Chinese population is not as high as you see in a lot of other places, just because they were all in the same area. No, not much migration happened in and out of China.
And what makes that important?
Because if you have an homogeneous population, then it's usually easier to roll over and take everyone under the same government, everyone having the same interest.
Gotcha.
Again, it's no surprise that communism worked out in China. It's not a new thing. They've always had that style of governing, of the centralized government. I'm not an expert in Chinese politics, so if I'm making any factual errors, I hope that someone will correct me and say, "Hey, this guy is BSing." I don't have that much reading on Chinese politics, so I try not to comment too much. But as a general narrative, it's easier to govern a country where
Homogeneous.
is more homogeneous. You have less conflicts going on in there, and yeah. So
the Suez Canal.
Yeah, going back to the Suez Canal. So you've got all these big guys now making a lot of money, making a lot of sea power, and they're like, "Hey, you know what? Let's get the middleman out of the game completely." The Turkey, which is Ottoman, Iran, Central Asia. Let's take them out of the equation. So they go and construct Suez Canal. So if you open your map, it's located in east of Egypt, west of the Sinai Peninsula. And the construction, I believe, took 10 years with the blood and the tears of the Egyptians at minimal cost to the UK. And the moment that opened up, you have now a new trade route. Now you have changed the course of geography in a sense, because by geography you were limited. Now you no longer are limited because you're bypassing the whole African continent.
Right.
To pass through Suez Canal, get into the Red Sea.
Right. So with regards to the construction, can you just give a little bit of background for those who aren't up to date with the history of how the Suez Canal was made? Because you mentioned the labor of the Egyptians, but how does a canal specifically get made? Do you know?
I'm not too familiar about the engineering part of it, of how you make a canal, but they basically, it's a very narrow road, so I think it can only fit one ship width-wise at a time, connecting the Red Sea to the Mediterranean Sea. But yeah, about the actual engineering of it, I don't know. I don't know how it was done.
Right, but that
But what
bypassed
I
Africa.
know, and what happens when you bypass
a land barrier that big?
The land barrier that big. It's like, if you watch the Cars, the animation, I really love that animation. If you watch Cars 1, if you remember the radiator spring, that tiny city, the narrative that they had, the reason they got all poor, because they built a new highway. So nobody would make a stop in there.
Right.
Building Suez Canal means that I'm building a new highway. So all these middlemans, Iran, Turkey, Central Asia, they are no longer part of the equation.
They're not on the same highway.
They are not in the same highway. And 2 years after the construction of Suez Canal, we have the first reported famine in Iran.
Wow.
And that follows by Turkey and then Russia.
Wow.
Is it a coincidence? I don't think so.
Pretty unlikely, yeah.
Very unlikely. Why? Because the money flow stops. You are being pushed outside. On the other hand, so Saudi Arabia, Yemen, those were the countries that always suffered from famine because they didn't have much, resources. They were not in a trade route, so they always lived in a poor condition. But now they are now starting to become part of the game.
Right.
They're now being part of the new equation, and that construction of Suez Canal essentially, as I said, took Ottoman, Iran, and the rest of the Central Asia countries out of the game forever. Up to today, they're still out of the game.
Right. Wow. Talk about a big impact.
Yeah. And then we have, that is followed by, in less than 100 years, we have the First World War. Then we have the fall of the Ottoman Empire, and then we have the formation of all these new countries that were made under the Sykes-Picot Agreement. So they had the French Prime Minister and English Prime Minister sitting together and be like, hey, how are we gonna separate the Ottoman Empire? And out of that they created Iraq, they created Syria, they created Lebanon, they created Palestine. Then that followed with the 1948. We have the creation of Israel, Jordan.
Right.
A little bit, I want to get into the ideologies, but I feel like I still need to talk a little bit more about the geography and the trade routes. Just
Sure.
a little bit more. Let's maybe touch on. I think we can touch on Russia.
Russia.
So Russia is the largest country on Earth, land mass on Earth, and even it was even larger in the time of USSR.
Right.
Yeah. However, they have two weak points, two major weak points. One is they do not have access to warm waters to help them navigate the trade routes.
Right.
Because Russia, as I said, from the north, it's frozen. From the east, it is challenged. Like it has access to Japan, has access to China, but
the terrain, I guess.
You can't do anything on the east. Like you can build your own community on the east, but that's it. It's not going to impact the capital. Right. Moscow, St. Petersburg, they're all the way on the west. Russia has 12 time zones, I think. So that's how far away these two, the east and the west, are. And on the west, you have the St. Petersburg, which goes into the Baltic Sea. But again, that is not a very suitable place to navigate because you have to pass through the Scandinavia, and then you have to pass through England. So it's not a very accessible sea. Right. And the Russian dream, which was brought up by Petr the Great, hence St. Petersburg's named after him, even though he made it sound like it's named after a religious person, but in reality we know he named it after himself. Petr the Great in the 1600s, he had the vision and the dream of we want to access the warm seas.
Right.
So Russia always, and how Russia can access the warm waters, if you look at it, it's either through taking over Istanbul, because if you open up the Black Sea map, you don't have it in there. I think you have to open up a new
Black Sea.
Yeah, just put Black Sea, Constantinople, or Istanbul. Yeah, there you go. So that's Russia, and then this is Turkey. You see Istanbul. So Istanbul is the link between Black Sea to the Mediterranean Sea. So if Russia could take over Constantinople, they would have been able to reach the warm waters. That would have been the easiest way for Russia. And they did a lot of work to make that happen. Obviously, they were always checked by France and England. The great game. That's what these three countries checking each other, because France and England did everything to stop Russia from achieving, from taking control over Istanbul. Russia did everything to stop France and England taking over Istanbul.
Right.
And that's why in the Greek War of Independence and Bulgaria independence, they had a lot of wars with Ottomans, and you would see in one war Russia funding the Greeks to fight Ottoman, and in one war England funding the Greeks, but then Russia funding the Ottomans. So there were a lot of these different fundings, different supports for these for the same countries,
but for different political purposes.
For different political purposes. And there's a cliche when you're reading politics, is that countries don't have friends, they have interests. That I think you can see it right away in there. Is that it's not like, again, in the narrative to convince the public is that, oh, Russia is helping Greece because they're Orthodox, these are Orthodox, and Ottoman are Muslims. But then when Russia helps Ottoman, they kind of don't know what to say. So they have these conflicts even within the people. That happened a lot in Greece in their War of Independence. That a lot of people were like, hey, we shouldn't be friends with Russia because they betray us. But a lot of people are like, oh no, we should be friends. So there's a lot of there's that dissonance there. Yeah, dissonance, because you're like, okay, then Russia, if they're Christians, why are they helping Ottoman? Because in reality, it's not a big. Nobody cares. They don't care if Ottomans are Muslim or not. It's all about
the political play,
political interest. So that was one way for Russia to make it through the warm waters or warm seas. The other one was to go through Central Asia, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan. And that's why, out of the fear for Russia reaching India, England forcefully separated Afghanistan from Iran, made it into a separate country to act as a buffer zone.
What do you mean by buffer zone?
It's a natural barrier between Russia and England, because Pakistan and India were all part of the British Raj, so they were all part of the British colony, and Afghanistan would be that buffer. Russia had to pass through Afghanistan, and it has a very harsh terrain. Afghanistan, similar to Iran, it has a very harsh terrain. It's extremely difficult to mobilize ground forces in Afghanistan soil, and that carried on in the Cold War. We have USSR conquering Afghanistan, then we have US out of fear for Russia training Mujahideens, that then they become Taliban. The rest is history. It's not because Afghanistan is a poor place or they're uncivilized people. They're one of the most civilized nations on earth. They were located in a bad place. Unlucky they were located in the middle of the turmoil. Right. So going back to Russia. So Russia had these two major disadvantages. They could not access the warm waters easily. They still can't. And they had such a large landmass without any major trade routes. And that's why the second last Tsar of Russia started the construction of the longest railway in the human history, which is the Trans-Siberian Railway, in order to connect the communities so Russia could start becoming a power. Because without the trade routes, even though Russia has a large landmass, it's disconnected. You cannot do any trades. And the history of how they constructed Trans-Siberian Railway, it's phenomenal. It's like the amount.
How they go about it?
They actually built it in pieces. So they built it, I think, in 6 or 7 pieces, don't have the actual number in mind. And they went through some of the harshest trains on earth to make this happen.
Right.
Not going to go about how exactly they constructed it, but I want to go to the importance of the trade routes and how they shape culture, how they shape movements.
Yeah.
The moment the construction of the Trans-Siberian Railway finishes, it allows for these different communities that essentially lived in isolation to talk with each other, for the information to be passed around. And that same railway that Tsar built because it wanted to make the Russia great became one of the most important factors for the October Revolution, where the Bolsheviks took over. They utilized this railway to transport people,
Right.
also transport the news. Without railway, how are you transporting the news? And I want everyone to think back. There's no internet, there's no radio, there's no TV.
No
It's a word
Google.
of mouth. There's no Google. It's a word of mouth. And the same Trans-Siberian Railway, without it, it's very hard to say that Bolsheviks would have ever been able to make the revolution. How are you going to mobilize the people? And Lenin's statue is actually in one of the railway stations because that's where he, dropped off and led the revolution. That's how important the trade routes are.
Wow.
Now, going into okay, let's see. What are we gonna
pick your flavor today, huh?
pick my flavor today?
Let me ask you about this.
Yeah, maybe ask me about.
Yeah. So let's go into a little bit of the racism aspect with regards to climate and geography. We're in a weird time right now. So we're recording this in 2021, and to say it's been a weird couple of years is not doing service enough. But throughout various parts of the world, racism is on the rise. There is a rise in extreme politics. And I'm wondering if any of this could be attributed to the climate or what we've been talking through this podcast.
Absolutely. So one personal belief that I have, this is very much my humble opinion, is that everyone would act the same. All the human beings will act the same under the same situation. And why do I say that? And we did actually see some examples of it, of all these civilized people. There's actually a quote from Dark Knight. All these civilized people will end up eating each other. We did see that in COVID. That all these civilized nations, Canada, U.S., Australia, people fought over toilet papers.
Oh man, Throwback Thursday.
Yeah. Why is that? Because at the end of the day, we are a biological organism, and biological organisms' destiny is to survive, have kids, and die off. So you do everything to survive. Okay, so
even if that means hoarding.
Oh yeah,
enough
even if that means
toilet paper to fill the house.
Even if that means committing genocide, you do it. Why genocides happen?
Right.
Yeah. So the climate definitely makes a big impact. Why is that? Going back, if you don't have economic stability, if you don't have money coming into your country, you will have to fight for survival. How do you fight for survival? Well, you find a scapegoat, which is usually your foreign nations in that country or foreign neighbors, to blame them and to fight against them. An example of it, as we are seeing it, it is happening in front of our eyes, is the rise of the far-right Hindu nationalism in India.
And do you mind just giving a little bit of background for those not familiar?
Exactly. So I think since 2005, don't have the exact number. There has been a lot of political groups getting power in India that support far right Hindu nationalism. So that's an ideology based on that. And especially like Muslims are very bad. We should get rid of Muslims, and we should bring India back to being Hindustan. That's actually still the name a lot of countries call India, Hindustan, which is the land of Hindus. We should make India great again. If you want to think about it from the Trump vibe.
Right.
Why is that happening? Again, going back, this is a very complex issue, so I may just be pointing out one part of it to make it simple, but it's not simple. It's not just one factor. It's just
Complex factors all
very
interacting
complex.
together.
One of the reasons is that by 2050, we are expecting more than 200 million climate refugees.
And what is a climate refugee?
So these are the people that have to flee their region because that region is no longer sustainable for farming, or the land is going under the waters, getting drowned, or there is a lot of forest fires, anything attributed to the climate, that land is no longer a place to live. And by 2050, we're expecting at least 200 million climate refugees. To give you a context, the Syrian refugees that the entire Europe and US, they're all freaked out and they're like, oh, we don't know what to do about it. The whole thing did not exceed 10 million people.
Wow.
So when you talk about 200 million people, climate
20
refugees,
times.
that is significant. A lot of these people may come from Bangladesh, because we know that Bangladesh is one of the countries that is being impacted the most from the climate change. Their country is drowning because of the sea levels are rising. Their country is literally drowning. And Bangladesh is either highly dense country. And where are these people going to flee to? They're either going to flee into Myanmar or Burma, and we already know how a lot of weird things is happening in Burma. There's I'm not following it too closely, but
I guess it's just a brief context. It seems like a lot of army seniority is coming in and taking away democracy, and I guess both sides are just getting extreme in an effort to prevent migration.
I think that's I haven't read much on the Myanmar
I haven't either.
politics. I'm just following because honestly I'm reading on a lot of other things. But go back to India. So where do these Bangladeshis can flee to? They only have India. They are surrounded on north by Bhutan, by Nepal, but you cannot live in those areas. It's a mountain terrain. You cannot have a lot of people living there. So they are fleeing into India. India is already populated. There should be a social force to help mobilize the masses against this foreign enemy, if you want to think about it that way, get into your country. What's the easiest way? Well, we are good, they are bad. Let's mobilize the masses to be the force and act against Bangladesh. And one of the fascinating things I personally observed is that in the recent, Israeli-Palestinian war, because I was on Twitter, I saw a lot of accounts with presumably linked to India, whether they're actual real accounts or fake accounts by these Hindu nationalism groups, hard to determine, supporting Israel with the messages such as kill all these Muslims, things like that, God bless Israel, Israel and India should be friends, those kind of messages that sent an sense of an extremism, in a sense that hey, we hate Muslims. Why do you hate Muslims? Because you need to, because they are getting into your country. It's not because they're Muslims, it's because they are the foreign force, and you need the common denominator to groupify them and stereotype them. You can't say they're Bangladeshi, because then they may be the part of an Indian, because Bangladesh used to be part of India.
Yeah.
If you say Bangladeshis are bad, then people are like, oh no, but they were part of us. But it's easy to say, hey, these are Muslims, and that also kind of makes sense in the context because you have Pakistan, which also having the conflicts with India.
Right.
Yeah, so I think that's the question you asked, how that leads to racism to extremism, is because when you are hungry and when you need a job,
Yeah.
you don't think about others. That's the nature of humans. That's what we are. um but I'm not talking about individual cases. I'm talking about collectively,
Yeah.
as
As
a
a
society,
species.
as
Yeah.
a species, as a society.
Yeah.
Why someone like Trump gets popular? Is it because people in the US are evil and are racist? No, it's because there has been a lot of economical crisis in the US. There is a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of events already happening in the US linked to the climate change. Obviously, in no one's grave, they're not going to write the cause of death climate change, but we see it happening. All of these um, tornadoes that are happening in the eastern part of the US, all these
Right.
forest fires in California that are happening. In the book, the uninhabitable Earth by David Wallace Wells, that was published, recently in 2017. He talks about how certain places in California, they no longer are eligible for house insurance because the insurance companies are like, hey, this is high risk. We cannot, because there's going to be forest fires. You better leave. These uncertainties with the economical crisis, for the typical person, they may not really think of, oh, this is the climate change happening to me. It's the Democrats taking away the jobs. Is the terrorists messing up with my country? And then you have someone, a populist like Trump, coming in and be like, hey, you know what? I'll make America great again. Get all the masses, create
Right.
jobs, give people the money. So with this whole climate change happening, we do expect people to be more extreme, to
Yeah.
have more wars, to have more chaos, and to have a lot of very interesting but sad events
Absolutely.
happening. Yeah, and even something as simple as the increase in the ambient temperature. If you look at the research, I don't have the actual number in mind, but I can give you the paper I read. By 1 or 2 degree increase in the temperature, the number of police shooting goes up, the number of traffic crashes go up, the number of domestic abuse. These are all just by a few changes in your ambient temperature. We are very fragile species in that sense, that when these tiny changes, going back to the analogy of the petri dish, these small changes, we think we are like God, we can fix everything. We can't. We get impacted directly by even small things such as the ambient changes in the ambient temperature.
Absolutely. And just speaking on the microbe, and I want to go back after this, but on the microbes, the changes in temperature, it's going to affect only a couple, right? It's an average thing. A certain temperature, it affects only a certain amount. It's not like if you increase it by 1 degree, every single one's going to die in a snap of a finger. On average, that happens. And I think it's
Exactly.
the same. It's the same with society, right? You get individuals who are in worse circumstances than others, whether it's because of their location, whether it's because of their financial opportunities, like you're mentioning with, all the complications in the economy. And I think right now it's become so radicalized. Everyone's like, oh, that person failed. It's because of themselves. I succeed because I deserve it. And the reality of it is there is so much things up to luck. I mean, just think about it. We're talking about geography and climate. We didn't get to choose where we live, man. We didn't get to choose
Exactly.
where we're born. We didn't get to choose our skin color, our complexion. We didn't get to choose what biases are in the world that we live in. And it really breaks my heart when I see, individuals taking discriminatory action to the point of physical assault without even confronting one another. And going back to the story that I mentioned with regards to the war, where the German soldier and the American soldier, just through offering food, the equivalent of all human needs, it was a difference between life and death. And it's so sad that there's such extreme posts And, whether it's being for the police or against the police, or for these people or against these people. And it's a political, and I think through this podcast, like we've just explored, we're all really pawns in this bigger system, and we're made to believe that we are the chess player, but we are simply just a pawn moving through certain moves, and similar to that, if you're a pawn, you can move forward, and if there is an opposing element, you can go and you can take their space and you move it a little bit of a diagonal. But ultimately, we're not the ones making the decisions, and the hate that's associated with this is very disheartening.
Yeah, it's very. I don't want to say it's. I didn't find it sad when reading these things. Obviously you kind of get a sense of why are we doing this to each other, but at the same time you realize it's the evil, but it's the necessary evil. But it gives me a sense of power, in a sense that I try not to play this game. I try not
What
to
do you
be
mean by
that.
that?
I try not to be that soldier in the chess that they can move around. I can walk out. Obviously, all of us can walk out to certain degrees. We can't walk out of the society.
Right.
But if there's certain movements, if there's a certain war, if there's any involvement, I can ask, what is really happening? Is it really the good versus evil? Because the good versus evil, when you study history, you realize that is just a narrative that is made by the people who wrote the books to
Absolutely.
justify their action.
Absolutely.
And one other thing I wanted to touch on very quickly, it's very hard to stay on the topic.
I know, man.
I do apologize to the
No.
listeners of the podcast because it's a lot of complex topics that I'm trying to talk about, but at the same time, I want to keep it on track. But going a little bit going back to the bigger picture of the geography and how that shapes the certain political and the collective, conscious and unconscious. Let's look at Germany as an example. The narrative that we all have heard and we love to hear is that if Hitler wasn't there, World War II wouldn't have happened. Or something even more romanticized. Hitler had a rough childhood. They didn't allow him to art school, so he became radical and started killing people. In reality, the individuals don't make a major impact in historical decision and the destiny of the countries. It's their climate, their ability, and the environment they have lived in for centuries. Before there was religion, you had German people, you had people of German descent. I don't know what's the correct way of saying it, living in that area. That area never, barely changed. The Rhine River has always been there, as long as humans were there. The Alps were always been there, as long as humans been there. The German question, unlike what a lot of people may think, the German question has been there since the early 19th century, late 18th century. England, France, and Russia has always, we're always worried about Germany. Why is that? There are certain geographical phenomena that make Germany a country of worry. The number one reason is that Germany has many navigable rivers, which means that you can use those as trade routes. Navigable rivers, basically the rivers you can just have ships in it. So Germany has access to very good trade routes, which are very cheap, because the sea route is still the cheapest. Has always been the cheapest up to today, up to the this day that we're talking. The sea route is still the cheapest. So Germany has a lot of navigable rivers. On the east of Germany, you have Poland and you have Czech Republic, which are flatlands. So there is absolutely no natural barrier in Poland and Czech to stop Germany from mobilizing the troops. So the worry, and on the west, you also have France, which doesn't have again that much of the natural barrier. So the German question, the worry that England, France, and Russia always had is that if Germany becomes too strong, they will take over Poland, they will take over Belarus, and they will get to Russia, which to a good extent happened in World War II. If they become too weak, Russia will take over them, and they will get close to France and UK. So these three countries were always worried of Germany. They didn't know what to do with it. They formed the Croatian kingdom, which they thought would solve the problem, but it didn't. After the First World War, they cut Germany in the Treaty of Versailles from having army. They destroyed the German economy. Like they did every mean to totally suppress Germany.
Right.
But at the end of the day, we did realize because Germany had the able to mobilize the troops, had the able to use these navigable rivers, were able to gain the power again, and start World War II. That's the geography of Germany, and it's still there. And the only way they were finally able to solve the German question, can you guess what it was?
What was it?
The formation of the European Union. Because what is happening in the European Union really is that Germany and France are the biggest power in it, the economical power. So Germany, it satisfies that sense of Germany that they want to expand and they want to rule over Europe, gives that sense of satisfaction because economically they're ruling over. At the same time, it restricts from Germany from doing any sort of troop mobilization, because in the EU they are bounded, and also US has its largest offshore military base situated in Germany. And I've read in the news there has been a lot of movements in Germany now. They're like, hey, we should exit European Union, and that is going to be a very dangerous thing because Germany may act up again. Again, it's not about the individual. It's not about the individual. It's about
we're microbes on a petri dish.
We are microbes in the petri dish, and that shapes the political conscious and the unconscious that you have. Like people have that in the back of their head without even consciously thinking about it. That goes the same with the UK. UK has always been a sea power, as I said. As in especially from the 1600s. They were able to rule over the entire world solely based on their sea power. And this was a quote from Winston Churchill. Reading it straight from the quote. I copy pasted it. If Britain must choose between Europe and the open sea, she must always choose the open sea.
Wow.
Why did Brexit happen? One of the reasons that the British people always wanted to be separate from the Europe, because they always want to choose the sea, because Europe most of the Europe is a land power in a sense.
Right.
Russia is German. UK is always a sea power.
Right.
And because we know that even when they joined the EU, they didn't fully join into, they kept their own currency. They wanted to be independent.
Right.
And even someone like Margaret Thatcher, when she came into power, she described EU as a form of communism. So she wasn't a fan of EU either.
Wow.
Yeah, because in some sense, if you think about EU, it's some sort of a communism, if you want to think about it that way, because you are responsible for paying the poor nations. You're giving the funds to Greece, to Bulgaria, to Serbia, to Italy, to Portugal. That's some sort of a communism, right? It's
because you're redistributing wealth. And
yeah, So for the people in the UK, ruling over the seas has always been in the back of their head. That's where their power is, and that's where they've always ruled.
Hmm.
Another story I wanted to throw in, just very quickly, about the importance of the trade routes. So, in order to make sure there are no competitors in your trade routes, you either, as I said, you bypass certain trade routes, which happen in the,
Suez
uh,
Canal.
by Suez Canal. You either make, or the other way is to make the trade routes unsafe,
Hmm.
and that's what UK did. A lot of pirates. There was a group of pirates called the Sea Dogs in the
Yep.
1600s. They were, if it was with today's term, they were state-sponsored terrorists. They were funded by the UK to attack Spanish and French
Ships.
fleets to make the trade route unsafe. That was one of the reasons UK became, a great sea power, because they were able to kill off France, Spain, and Portugal, because they paid these guys and were like, hey, attack these ships, don't touch our ships. If you get caught, don't tell anyone we were there. And that sea influence, it carried on even up to today. Why do you think Australia and New Zealand and Canada fought in World War I and World War II? Again, the simple narrative is that it's because they wanted to act against the evil and they were the amazing, country. It was because UK was protecting their trade routes, and UK was like, if you are not going to fight for me, well, I'll let you die off.
Wow. Wow.
Because why would Australia ever want to fight for the UK? Even today, they still fight. They are an independent nation. They are by no means under threat. Why do they want to sacrifice their men for a war that's happening 10,000 kilometers away? Because they don't have the power to maintain the safety of their routes. They never had that. So they either had to play with the UK and say yes, sir, or die off and have their routes being unsafe. That's the same in Somalia. Why
Right.
Somalia hasn't have a stable country, a stable
Economy.
government for years? They have the Somalian pirates. Well, because that's where as I said, the most important trade route in the world is. You have the Gulf of Aden going through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, Red Sea, Suez Canal. So if you have certain countries paying Somalian pirates to attack certain countries, well, you're making the route unsafe. And talking again, going a little bit more, because I want to go into the more recent events so people can,
Sure.
can relate to, of how these trade routes shape the culture, shape countries. If you look at the country of Eritrea, if you just Google it, it's by Ethiopia. So Ethiopia is one of the most ancient countries in the world, and I think for many years it was the oldest human species skeleton was found in. They found it in Ethiopia, and I think they found another one in Morocco. So, but it's a large country. It's very populated. I think it's more than 100 million people. And one of and their Ethiopians are generally proud because they were one of the few countries in the world that did not get officially colonized, and they've
Right.
always been a major power. I
Right.
actually just ordered a book about the medieval relationship between Ethiopia and the Holy See. So I'm definitely looking forward to that. Because Ethiopia, they had a major, they were majorly Christian, so they've always had a really good relationship with Europe, and they've always been a very powerful and very rich country. However, one thing that happened was the formation of the country of Eritrea. So Eritrea was formed under the funding from the US. Obviously, again, they don't say it that loud. They sounded like, the Eritrean people wanted to separate and wanted to form their own country, and they had major civil wars up until few years ago between Eritrea and Ethiopia, until finally, Eritrea became a country. What's the significance of it? And by the way, the Ethiopian president that finally accepted Eritrea being a country, just won a Nobel Prize in like 2019, I think, or 2018. I don't remember the time. They basically gave the guy a Nobel Prize and like, end the war and call it off. What's the significance of it is Eritrea made Ethiopia a landlocked country. It kicked Ethiopia out of the international equation. So Ethiopia is now under the control. They no longer can be independent, because if you do not have access to the trade routes, you're always going to be dependent.
Right.
South Sudan, the country I think was officially recognized in 2019 as a new country. Who funded the formation of South Sudan? A lot of funding from the US. Why is that important? If you look at the borders of South Sudan, the northern borders, it cuts Sudan on the White Nile River, which means if they build a dam, which they are building one, they can easily suffocate Sudan and Egypt.
Right.
So the country of South Sudan is essentially formed to put pressure on Sudan and Egypt. Because at any moment, you see that White Nile River on the far right.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes to the rule of technology. I said geography, we can't make changes. One of the ways that we can alter it is building dams. And building dams, the war on the water, that's how we can change the course of an entire nation. So South Sudan now will have full control over Sudan and Egypt. Same with Ethiopia right now. So Ethiopia is also building, has actually already built the dam, is the Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, or GERD in short. That's on the Blue Nile. So Blue Nile and White Nile will merge in together to the Great Nile, and that's what passes through Sudan, passes through Egypt, one of the most important rivers in the world, the center of civilization. Which means that Ethiopia and South Sudan can easily starve Sudan and Egypt to death.
Wow.
If they need to.
Crazy.
That's the exact same thing that's happening in Turkey. Turkey has built many dams on the Tigris and Euphrates. So they can and are already suffocating Iraq and Syria.
Wow.
Why Tibet is such a area of collision in China? Why China does not let Tibet be independent? Why US supports Tibet being independent? Why Dalai Lama gets so hyped? He's not the only one who has humanitarian
Right.
Because ruling over Tibet would mean ruling over water sources. Ruling over water sources means that we can easily suffocate India.
Wow.
Why is there the fight on the Kashmir area? It's not because there's anything very special about Kashmir, because it's the source of the rivers. Whoever controls that controls the water, controls the lives of the people. So even something as simple as, hey, you've got Dalai Lama, you've got Tibet, you are getting a narrative that, these people are under oppression. It may not, they are definitely under oppression, but it's not just because China hates Tibetan people.
Right.
Because that's where they can influence power on the rest of the world. Another thing that China is doing, they're building a lot of islands.
A lot of islands.
In the
to get
south
that
side.
increased trade and waterway.
In the South China Sea, because they are, working on altering the trade routes, creating new trade routes, and obviously they need to provide they have to mobilize troops to make sure the routes are safe.
For sure.
The other country in the world that is very interesting, and it's one of the countries in the world with the worst human rights score, probably even worse than North Korea. Obviously, nobody talks about it. Is Djibouti. What's up with Djibouti? Yeah, just Google it and you see why it is important. You can bring it up.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to spell Djibouti, so that's putting me pressure.
It's Djibouti.
Okay. Let's go here.
It's right by Ethiopia, so even if you search Ethiopia, we can see Djibouti.
I think I got it. Let's go here. Map. Play some elevator music during the wait. Perfect. So let's go here. And without further ado, we will proceed with the scheduled map of Djibouti.
Okay. What can you tell me about Djibouti based on what we have talked about? What do you think the importance of Djibouti is?
I think it's this riverway to Ethiopia.
Go a little bit more broad, because I just said Ethiopia.
Bunch of ports, huge access to the Red Sea.
And what is the Red Sea? What's up with Red Sea?
Man,
where does Red Sea end up to?
Let's see if we can have the cheat code from other maps.
Okay, I'm not gonna.
Yeah, you should probably just tell me.
So Red Sea will get into the Suez Canal.
Right.
So Djibouti is right at the Bab el-Mandab Strait. So that's another bottleneck. That's the Bab el-Mandab Strait. I don't think it's named there, but the Gulf of Aden goes to Red Sea. That place between Yemen and Djibouti, that's the Bab el-Mandab Strait. So a lot of countries have bases in Djibouti. Israel has bases, US has bases, Iran is trying to make influence to create bases in there. UAE is in one of the islands in close to Djibouti, is building a very large airport that is obviously designed for
military,
for aircraft jets. So
wow.
Djibouti, and it's one of the countries with the worst human rights. Obviously nobody talks about it because they should keep it quiet and keep it cool, because there are in our interest. Again, when it comes to bigger pictures, the countries that talk about democracy didn't really care about human rights. They may use the talk on human rights to get their
troops and whatever fills their political place.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not about they really care about humans, which is sad, but it's true. Same with Yemen. Why is there a fight in Yemen between Saudi and Iranian proxy? Because Yemen has such an important geopolitical location.
Right.
So again, it's not Yemenis or uncivilized.
It's not personal.
It's not personal.
It's feeding propaganda to fill the play.
Exactly, because that's the trade route. That's the highway checkpoint. However, there's one thing that I said, climate is going to change the equation. We know that most probably the Suez Canal will no longer be operable unless they do something about it. We had a prime example of it a few months ago, the ship that got stuck in the Suez Canal for 6 days, something like that.
Right.
And I don't remember numbers, but it was like every 1 minute, $100 billion gone. Again, simple narrative was that the captain had no idea how to pilot the ship and they screwed up. The reality was that there was actually a storm happening there that was unexpected. And it's expected to have more of those storms because of the climate change, which means that we have to look for an alternative, most likely, because operating Suez Canal will be very expensive, because if you have more of these events happening. One of the alternatives that China has started since 2013, I think, is called the One Road, One Belt initiative, which is essentially recreating
Silk Road.
the Silk Road. As I said, is still not the may not be the cheapest one because the sea route is still way cheaper. So China is still, as I said, actively working in the South China
Right.
Sea. Why is there dispute over Taiwan? It's not like China really loves Taiwan. These are important geostrategic locations. Why is there a dispute in this, even the South China? There's, I think, called in the Nine Dashes. It's surrounding the South China Sea. There are these tiny islands that China
Mhm.
says they're mine. Other countries are like, no, they're not yours. And it's not like those islands mean anything. It's like if you have rule over those islands, you can militarize them, so you
Yeah.
can control the trade routes. So China is actively looking for new trade routes, and one road, one belt initiative is one of them. Then the question comes: why is there a lot of push to make peace with Taliban? Like Iran is trying to make peace with Taliban. What happened to the human rights? Well, because now if you do not make the road safe for Taliban, the one road, one initiative bill will not be safe because it will cross through Afghanistan.
It's all about the trade. It's all about the
So you
routes.
is all about the trade. So now there's a lot of talk with to make peace with Taliban
And I guess
because
that's why US probably left.
that's it could be one
Well, it could
reason.
be.
Yeah, could be one reason that US left. They even very it's hard to say. There's definitely other reasons, but I
Well,
think one of
based
the
on our
yeah yeah
conversation, I guess using that
yeah
logic.
because if and again that goes back to the Middle East politics again. Why Iran is funding a lot of proxies in Iraq and a lot in Syria because it needs to make the trade route its own. Why US makes Middle East a shit show? Because if it's unsafe, you cannot use that trade route. You have to use their own trade route.
Yeah.
That's where the money flows.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think a couple of other concepts I wanted to go
Yeah.
through.
Ben, let me ask you two questions, and I think we'll
Sure.
close off.
Yeah, I know it's a lot.
We're
Yeah,
nearing 2 hours. I like your face, but I think seeing 4 more hours of it might be my limit.
yeah.
I think you're probably the same, maybe a little bit less than my time frame. But let me ask you this, okay? So one is going to be taking these principles and applying it to today with China and the rest of the world. And, China has been trade partners with globally because of their manufacturing powerhouse. But this event took a huge economic, political, and health hit all over. So I'm wondering what do you think? And again, we're not geniuses or anything, just two dudes having a chat. It's going to happen from this. What do you think the implications are?
I don't know.
Hmm.
It is very difficult to answer these questions of what is happening in the future. A couple of reasons. One is that the climate change is happening very fast. In the past, it would have taken centuries,
Yeah.
generations to see these changes. We see a rapid change. So all these equations may need to be adopted right away.
Right.
Second challenge, which again is also benefit or challenge, we have the data, the internet. So internet is the new trade route, which means that you have the news separating instantly rather than you waiting generations to see these things.
Yeah.
So that could change the equation of how everything goes around. So I don't know what's going to happen in the future. What are the implications? I don't think anyone would know, to be
Right.
honest, because
Too
we
much. Too much
here's
unknown.
the thing: we cannot imagine climate change. That's also one of the things David Wells mentioned in his book, The Uninhabitable Earth. We don't have the power to imagine the catastrophe that the climate change will bring to us. Even in
Right.
our movies, Hollywood has not been able to picture climate change
Climate
in
change.
full. It has pictured certain aspects of it. Interstellar, you have the storms. Obviously, this like any movies related to zombies, that has the disease, that has the racism, all of those involved in it. You have the uh, um, um, droughts, you have sea rises, but none of the movies have put everything together. We
Just
don't have
certain
the, we
pieces of
do
the puzzle.
we do not have the capacity to imagine that, the catastrophe.
It seems like it's something that's man, it this whole talk we've talked about so many different aspects of trades, routes, climate change, and it's crazy because everything's accelerating. When we were kids, we were told that we were in like the best time in history, but I think ever since 2020, 2021, life has changed drastically, and that's, you know, what's that word? That calmness that a lot of people who are millennials or Generation Z experience has been taken back. We're in a whole new world. We're in a whole new way of living, a way of seeing life. And it's an interesting time to be alive. It's with politics, with the changes in human dynamics and all of that. I'm wondering this, okay? So we talk about climate, we talk about geography, and we talk about how humans are microbes that need an optimal temperature. Now, I'm going to ask a very complex question that I want your opinion on, and it's very hard, but it would just make sense. Why are we unable to all inhabit Earth as a collective of humans? Why are we divided by country, creed, political affiliation, when ultimately all of us want the same thing? All of us think the same. It's a very deep question, and it's a
It's
little
a,
bit of a
it's
tangent, but I think it also kind of fits in.
because we don't have the same interests, we don't have the same resources, we are not born the same way. That what you're saying would be applicable, not even that applicable, would be relatively applicable, let's say, if everyone was born in
The same region and geography?
same region in geography.
Mm,
And I mean, that thing failed eventually. That's what communism was trying to achieve. It's like, hey, can we all please live in peace? We can't,
constant conflict has to arise.
because there are certain things that is out of our control. No matter how hard you try, you cannot move the Rocky Mountains,
Yeah.
and that will always make the separation.
Hmm.
No matter what you do, you cannot move the Golan Heights in Israel and Jordan.
Right.
So Golan Heights is occupied by Israel. It's
Right.
considered an occupied territory by the UN. Israel keeps building, houses in there, because that's a very geopolitical, important point to them, because that's where Israel can easily be exposed.
Hmm.
Any nation in the world would have been in place of Israel would have done the same thing.
Right.
It's not because they're bad. It's very unfortunate for the Palestinians. It's what has been done. We cannot go back. We cannot change. Once something happens, we cannot change it. So living in peace, it the reason for it is not because humans love war. They have to go on wars because there's the conflicts and the conflicts of interests.
Hmm.
And that, again, that goes beyond ideology, that goes beyond the government, that goes beyond the persons. Iran and Israel will always, if again circumstances remain the same in terms of the geography and the trade routes, will always have competing interests.
Right.
Even if Iran is being ruled by a Jewish government, even if that's the case,
Right.
because ideologies are there to um, meet a demand that is being put by the geopolitical aspect of a country. I really wanted to talk about this part of it. Obviously I lost track of the time and we went over time, but that was the part that I really wanted to touch on how ideologies serve the geopolitical needs and because Iran is the area I study the most, why Iran become Shia, why the rest of the um, countries on the west become Sunni Muslims. So, um, but it's not necessary just you choose Shia versus Sunni, you choose Judaism versus Christians fighting with Muslims because they don't like each other. No, it's the geopolitical need for having those ideologies to gather the masses and
Yeah.
having people justify your actions so people can unite with you. And we know when people are in a crowd, when we are in masses, we lose our rational.
Yeah.
We don't think rationally. And we knew that as early as 1800s. Gustave Le Bon, in his book that he wrote after the French Revolution, he talked about the crowds and the masses, and he brought up those points as one of the people that came up with the idea of social psychology, and it's still true today because when we are in a crowd, we
We lose our individuality and
we
rational
lose our
thought.
and there well because you're all in you're in the hype, but you also don't fear prosecution. If you have watched The 12 Angry Men, 1957, true masterpiece. It's a movie 2 hours in a single room. You have 12 juries having a debate about a law case. Obviously, I'm not going to spoil it. But what you will see is that these individuals realize that their own decision may not necessarily make a huge impact because it's a collective decision. So it's less likely one person will be prosecuted. That's the same thing in masses. Why masses commit genocide? Why masses, even in very appropriate social moves such as the Black Lives Matters. Why did you have some people destroying the streets, attacking the markets and stuff? Because you lose that sense of
Barrier.
rational, and
Right.
you're not going to get prosecuted because it's impossible to prosecute every single person that practices in a social and that joins a social movement. That's the same thing why Nazis formed. Well, because people knew that you can't prosecute every single Nazi soldier. Yeah, you can
Yeah.
prosecute the leaders, but this single soldier,
Yeah.
they can get away with it.
Right. And I think one last point that I just wanted to make is you mentioned lastly that the internet is kind of like the new trade route where the information is being passed. And this is, in my opinion, very true. And I think this is actually one of the reasons why the internet brought a lot of stability because it was globalization. Everyone could hear information, they could search it on their own. And, there wasn't just one newspaper giving you your local news in a way that would favor its own objectives, whether political or economic. And I think that was great. But I think the reason right now that we're seeing a lot more radicalization, and this is because of my own experience, with marketing, both online and in person, is the social media algorithm. And I've talked about this a couple times on my show, but essentially, social media wants to keep you on their site for as much as possible. So it runs these algorithms in the back to see what you spend more time on, what you click like on, what you comment on, the things that draw your attention in more. And it's no surprise it's something that is extreme, it draws people's attention more. The problem with that is once you keep spending more time on an extreme point of view, whether for left, right, creed, race, anything, you get shown this more and more and more. And I'm going to throw in a little term we both learned from the MCAT, the social determination theory. And essentially, people are going to make a decision based on 3 pillars. Those pillars are competence, relatedness, and autonomy. Now, when you feel that you are kind of like the underdog finding, hidden information, right? And that's happening right now with the whole craziness of the world. You feel like you're competent. Oh, yeah, the mainstream media, they don't know what they're talking about. And that's just an example. I'm not pinning it on that person. Same with someone on the opposite objective, finding that hidden gem that other people can't find. With relatedness, if you're shown an exclusive feed that other people have already been put in the same algorithm, you're getting the similar points of view. So you're like, wow, yeah, there is a community. Why aren't people understanding this? And autonomy, you're picking the posts that you interact with, but that's already been filtered and shown to you. And there's a couple reasons why I'm mentioning this. One reason is this scares me very much so because now whoever can master sponsoring ads, making content that is more likely to retain customers, can ultimately dictate the way that individuals feel about the world. And that is very scary for me. But on the other hand, it is going with current events. It is, the whole coronavirus, the vaccine debate. You have people on one side saying, you need to take vaccines, and others, you're dumb if you take a vaccine. And this whole conflict is so wrong, because based on the self-determination theory, both of these people are seeing only one side of the puzzle, and they all clash. One says you're wrong, one says the other wrong. I think as a society, and this goes back to how we're talking about people can't think rationally in this, we really need to find a way to step back and say, wow, like, maybe we shouldn't have this much prejudice or discrimination against someone else based on their creed, religion, and this. And seeing ourselves as that pawn, seeing ourselves as that microbe can really do us a service. Because even in this whole vaccine debate, people all want the same thing. You want a home, you want a family, you want to smile, you want some entertainment, you want to go through life, enjoy your time. And it really hurts me, because I feel like as a species, we're destroying each other one step at a time, where there should be compassion and empathy for one another.
Very, wise words. And to add to that, the challenge of internet is also too much information. Because when you have too much information, it's like
That's
a
right.
computer. Yeah, it's like a computer. Your processor cannot take that much information. So right now, it's not like in the Middle Ages where the church was holding of the information. Now the information is available, but because it's so much, you only see the ones that get
Filtered to you.
filtered to you. Why do they get filtered to you? Because the news agencies get funded from certain places to show certain news. It's a business. No, it's and that's why it's very important to read different sources, do an average, because it's very hard to find a truly independent source. But if you find one source from the right, one source from the left, average it, you can hope that this is the truth. It may not be the truth.
Absolutely.
And one reason I really am really interested in the field is because it allows you to read more and create your own narrative and create your own puzzle, and also being open to update your information.
Absolutely.
Like I've
Absolutely.
learned in the past 3 years reading on the geopolitics, I've learned so many things, and I'm pretty sure that in 10 years, I may go back and listen to this podcast and be like, hey, you know what? This part you said, it's not really true. We can never be sure about what's right, what's wrong.
Right.
And that's why, at the beginning of the podcast, I emphasize this: do not, like, nobody should ever quote anything from this podcast. This is purely to create an interest to realize our world is way more complex than it may seem like.
And it may be 10 times more complex, or 100 folds more complex than we just talked about.
Exactly. Oh, yeah. I just,
Yeah.
again, like, half of the things I wanted to talk about, half of the theories, like
Yeah.
by Mackinder, he's the father of geopolitics, by Spikeman, like
Right.
all these things, I wanted to throw it out. Like we couldn't
It'd be a
talk about it.
6-hour podcast.
It would have been like, yeah, again, like each of these topics, it could be someone's entire thesis project. 10 years of formal research.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think what you mentioned earlier regarding the sources, I'm going to elaborate a little bit, and I think we'll go on to the closing segments. But, with regards to finding the different sources, it's very vital. Same thing with finding individuals who don't agree with your point of view. Because, it's great to say I'm right. I'm the smartest person in the world. I have an amazing mustache, so I'm obviously the best person, right? But, it's doing yourself a disservice, because ultimately, like you were saying, Benjamin, we have to update our reality, and we are not our thoughts. Our thoughts are similar to the climate. It changes. The geography, our human vessel, may be the same. Getting older, got a couple gray hairs here and there, but we have to update our knowledge. There's different experiences that you can learn through conversation, news sources, experiences, and to live and die by a political ideology, by a religion, And I'm not anyone who's like super special. I don't know what's right in the world, but I guess what I'm saying is just challenge yourself to learn more about your world. And if you still want to remain the same, fantastic, and you're on the right path. Um, but give yourself the freedom to change your mind if you find conflicting evidence. Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think. Did you want to add something to that?
No, I think it was a very, again, wise words. I loved it.
It's a
No,
mustache.
of course. No, one thing you're right is that we can never be sure we are right. To be honest,
That's the thing,
that's
right?
one thing. Yeah. But
Yeah.
my personal journey is to, you know, take more of a divergence approach, read more on the on the books, on the sources that don't simplify political issues, don't
Right.
simplify history, don't narrow it down to individuals. Churchill was the most amazing human on earth because of him we won the war.
Hmm.
Hitler is the worst human being in history because he killed a lot of people.
Right.
Taking that one-sided approach will be, as you said, a disservice, because that will put us into that crowd that may not think rationally and may commit actions that in the future regret and go
Hmm.
back to and be like, hey, you know what? I shouldn't have joined the army, for example.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Again, as you said, there's no right or wrong. We cannot be sure we are right. We cannot be sure we are wrong. But the sad thing is that the truth is there. Whether
Yeah.
we want it or we don't want it, the
And
truth
whether if
is,
we even know what the truth is, because
yeah,
ultimately we can't check, you know. But I
yeah,
think taking steps to get closer to the truth in our own way of perceived reality
yeah,
it's the ultimate venture everyone should take.
exactly.
I think Benjamin, what I'll do is I'll ask you two of our signature questions, and we'll quickly close off. But the first signature question that we asked on the show, and I didn't preamp this, so I'll say it right now. But what are your shout outs? Now, this can be for anyone, anything. Where can people find you? Um, yeah.
So, let me get. So you're talking about the social media handles? Is that what
Yeah.
is it?
Social
Yeah.
media handles. Where can people contact you, follow you? And do you have any shout outs to make that you'd like to cite? Um,
Yeah.
obviously, don't give me your full list of references here, but
Yeah. Yeah. So, on the shout outs, I think the two people that I really want to shout out to, because those were the ones that really grew the interest of geopolitics in me. One was my former boss. He's in Iran now, Armin Janatra. So if Armin, if you're hearing this, much love. And you can follow him on Instagram. Still makes a lot of interesting posts about geopolitics. He does a lot of has a vast area of knowledge, and all of it is self-educated. He never went to
Wow.
school for that. So that's one person, but all of his stuff are in Persian. So if
So
you
learn your Farsi if you want to follow
learn
that.
exactly. And the other shout out would go to, I'm thinking, it's gonna be honestly, I think my grade 8 history teacher. Um, I don't know if he's still alive. I hope he is. He's the one that really sparked the interest of history in me, and even though I really liked history from childhood, but he's the one that really made me
Fueled your
go through
passion.
it. Yeah, I think his last name was Damirchi. I don't remember his first name, but I don't know if he's ever gonna hear this. But yeah,
This was a very unique chat that we had. It's the Personal Process podcast is usually about the journey in one's life, but I think this one still fits because it's kind of talking about the overarching factors that our life plays into, right? And oftentimes it's good to take action for what you can, but it's also important to know how reality kind of shapes the way that we are, our thoughts, our ideologies. And I think this kind of, at least for me, it gave me an opportunity to really reflect. Why do I think of certain things in certain ways? Why was I taught to value certain notions? And when you're a kid, you don't really think about this. It's just in 1 year, okay, that's right. Okay, that's right. My teacher's saying I'm good, so that's right. And I guess this show was just to reaffirm that. Take a step back, write on a journal. What do you think? Why? Do you still agree with it? Do you want to change your mind? Because you're still a good person, regardless if you change your mind. I've changed my mind a million times. But yeah, I think, it really felt nice to explore this topic with you, Benjamin. And I'm wondering, in about a minute or less, what is your one message to the audience? This can be through our show. This can be a general thought. This can be your favorite flavor of the pizza, your favorite food, whatever you're into. Like, what is one thing that you'd like the audience to take away from you, this podcast, your thoughts?
Question everything.
Bam. Right on.
You don't need to be a conspiracy theorist. Don't be a conspiracy theorist. They're weird. If you're hearing this, sorry, but I had to say it. But question everything.
Yeah.
As Fahim said, why am I thinking the same way? Why is there a country fighting another country? Why is Sweden such an amazing country? Should I just quickly throw it? No, I think it's gonna open a can of worms. Yeah. People can go read it. It has to do with Cold War. I can talk about it later. Nothing happens for no reason.
There's always a purpose.
There's always a person, and the only way you can ever move towards truth is by asking questions, and asking fundamental questions. If there's certain event, if there's a farmers' protest in India, we have it right now. Why is it happening?
And why is it happening right now?
Yeah, is it because the government is bad and the farmers are the victims? We should fight for the farmers. It could be that, or it could be no. It's the water shortage. Is there's resources, the climate change. It's much more complex than we may look at it. Media may look at it,
or even ways that we know how to look about it, right?
Yeah. Question everything and expect to challenge yourself anytime in the future and update your knowledge. Have that ready. Have yourself just a computer ready to install new patches.
Yep. As I said, delete the ones that are outdated.
I may look back 10 years and be like, hey, you know what? That part was full of BS, man. It's okay. That's
okay.
That's the part of learning. That's the learning curve. And that's the divergence thinking. That's one of the downsides of the modern society compared to our older society. Like older society, you had more of like you have this physician who's also a philosopher, who's also an astronomer.
Yeah.
More modern society, we're more focused, but it's always nice to have that divergence. Study humanities, try to understand how human work, how human functions as creatures, not as what we know them as humans, because at the end of the day, we are a living organism following the rules of any living organism in the world. We just have the more sexy talents to brag about, but at the end of the day, there are a lot of things we can't change. We are not like we are not God. We cannot.
We have our limitations.
We have our limitations. No matter how much advanced we got, we went to the moon. We may go to the Mars. At the end of the day, we still need the water to drink. We still need the air to breathe, and we still need a suitable weather to live in, no matter what. And that determines how we act, whether we can be successful in life, our limitations, and how we may be able to change that if we ever get to a point of power, like building Suez Canal.
Right.
That reshaped history. We messed around with the geography and it reshaped history. Again, we can't say for good or for bad. Definitely beneficial for Europe.
But it was changed.
It was changed.
Yeah.
So that comes from the understanding of what is really impacting us. And it may not be the ideology, it may not be the religion. The religion is not the problem. Some people are like, oh, religion is the worst creation ever. This country is messed up because they're ruled by Islamist extremists. It's like, no.
I think
they are part of these puzzle.
the puzzle for the political place. Yeah, man, that was amazing words to close off. And I really enjoyed my time with you today, Benjamin. I think we explored a topic that a very minute niche group of individuals would have experienced before. And I thank you for sharing that to my audience. I thank you for coming on at a very short notice. I let Benjamin know about this recording like a day ago.
Yeah, and I had to prepare my notes because I wanted to make sure I get the dates right, I get the numbers right, and I know what I'm talking about, even though I half of the things I didn't talk about it. But yeah, no, thanks for having me, Parhamjan. It's been an honor, and I hope that whoever listens to this enjoys this, and more important than that, start questioning and start exploring to see if they can change how they look at the world. And if they're already looking at the world differently, continue with that.
Look at the world. Yeah. And look at themselves too. Change up. Yeah. With that said, thank you again for coming on. I'm hopeful that we can hopefully do another edition exploring a different topic. I think it will be very beneficial for everyone listening and for me too, and my mustache. So
yeah, for your mustache. And we'll see based on the reviews. If people comment that please do not bring him again,
oh man, not at all.
I can just give you a call and we can just talk about it.
No, we're definitely bringing you on. We're definitely bringing you on. Fair enough, Benjamin. Thank you again. And to the listeners and viewers of the Personal Process Podcast, thank you again for joining us on an episode, and we'll catch you on the next one. Hey everyone, I'm back after another amazing episode with another amazing guest. We hope we added value into your life so you could take the tips from this episode and fuel your process forward. If you enjoyed our episode today and think other friends or family members may also appreciate the lessons that our podcast brings, be sure to share us with them. Subscribe and rate our show so we know how we did. And always remember, trust the process.